I want to welcome you, Rita, on behalf of the Menkidi family. And I know if he found you were here, he would be elated and he would welcome you with open arms. We are so happy to have you here. And it's very, very special for all of us. And I know that poetry was extremely important to Ifanyi. And like you said, because it spoke to truth and to feelings, and I'm sure he shares that extremely. And I believe he's with you in spirit tonight. So thank you so much for being here. We're extremely grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe he is too.
And so thank you, Carol, for welcoming Rita. And I will start things off by saying good evening, and it's wonderful to see you all here. No surprise to see so many of you. Of course, we're thrilled and so fortunate to have Rita up with us this evening. First, as is customary, a few announcements, and of course, what more auspicious announcement to start with than Ndidi's big news. We want to extend a warm and joyful welcome to Ngozi Josephine and Katie Brown, and our blessings to Ndidi and her family. And on that note, upcoming at the Grolier, we're happy to announce the return of our in-person reading series in a hybrid format beginning in September. We'll be hosting Poets in the Store with a limited in-person audience while Zooming the reading out to the world. On Friday, September 10th, we bring you Art and Letters launch party featuring the poetry of 14 younger international poets, including Raquel Balboni, Justin Burnett, Blake Campbell, Emily Grochowski, Paul Rowe, Sam Ronowski, and an introduction by Philip Nikolaev. On Friday, September 17th, we're pleased to host Ruth Lepson and Karina Van Berkom. And on Thursday, September 23rd, Anthony Corelli and Troy Jollimore will be at the bookshop. All these readings will begin at 7 o'clock. Registration is required for all attendees, whether you're in person or virtual. And you can register for them online at grolierpoetrybookshop.org, as you know. At the moment, masks will be mandatory for in-person attendees, as those in the bookshop now know. But of course, we're monitoring ongoing developments, and protocols may shift depending on public health recommendations, so please stay tuned. Subscribe to our event newsletter if you're in any doubt for those and any other updates. And also, we have a very special event on the near horizon, the first annual Ifanyi Menkidi Memorial Reading. It's happening on what would have been his 81st birthday on August 24th. Somerville Poet Laureate Lloyd Schwartz will moderate, and Gail Mazer and Robert Pinsky will read. That's taking place again August 24th at 6 p.m. in Brattle Plaza in Cambridge. And registration is not required for that event. So a quick hello to James and everyone at the bookshop, Elizabeth there as well, to remind us the bookshop itself is now open for business Wednesday through Friday, and also on the first Saturday of every month from 11 to 7 p.m. Masks are not required during those hours if you have been vaccinated. So please come visit us in person at number 6 Plimpton Street. And one last reminder, if you have comments or questions for tonight's poet or the bookshop, please feel free to use the chat, and hopefully we will get to them. And now, without any further Zoom latency, tonight's poet. Pulitzer Prize winner and former U.S. Poet Laureate Rita Dove is the only poet honored with both the National Humanities Medal and the National Medal of Arts. This year, she was awarded the Gold Medal for Poetry from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And there's no doubt, if there were an Olympics for poets, which there used to be, of course, she would be a multi-gold medalist at the Parnassian Games. As noted in the Washington Post, her appointment as poet laureate was significant in terms of the message it sent about the diversity of our culture and our literature. During her tenure as poet laureate, Dove was the first poet to see the appointment as a mandate to generate public interest in the literary arts and specifically in poetry. She traveled widely during her term, giving readings in a variety of venues from schools to hospitals. Her recent works include Sonata Melodica and the National Book Award shortlisted collected poems 1974 to 2004. Her new book, Playlist for the Apocalypse, is due out next week. And we know you want to order at least one copy, and you can do that through our friends at bookshop.org, of course, if you can't stop by the store. The Boston Globe calls Playlist for the Apocalypse a piercing, unflinching new volume that offers necessary music for our tumultuous present, from perhaps the best public poet we have. In her first volume of new poems in 12 years, Dove investigates the vacillating moral compass guiding America's and the world's experiments in democracy. At turns audaciously playful and grave, alternating poignant meditations on mortality and acerbic observations of injustice, Playlist for the Apocalypse takes us from the smallest moments of redemption to catastrophic failures of the human soul. Listen up, the poet says, speaking truth to power. What you'll hear in return is a lifetime of song. She lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, where she teaches creative writing at the University of Virginia. And we couldn't be more delighted to have her here with us at the Grolier this evening. Rita Dove, thank you for being with us. Welcome.
Thank you, Partridge. Thank you, everyone, specifically to the Grolier Poetry Bookshop. It's so wonderful to have a space dedicated solely, exclusively to poetry and to see people in it tonight. So thank you for being there. It's really a deep, deep pleasure for me to read for you tonight and to entertain your questions at the end. So I thought that what I would do, since we are in our secret society of poets tonight, would be to start with the very first poem in Playlist for the Apocalypse, which was actually inspired by, or shall we say, triggered by, prodded by students of mine, and also deals with that very amorphous border between prose and poetry, and in fact, every genre. Students of mine had asked if they, why I had not written very many prose poems. And my kind of off the cuff remark at the time was, I'm not sure I really believe in the prose poem, which was of course meant to get under their skin. And they said, well, you should, and one student in particular said, you should write a prose poem just to prove your point. And I said, okay, I'll write an anti-prose poem. And this was the result. Can you hear me all right? Is that all right? Okay, fine. I just want to make sure before I begin. So this is a poem, a prose poem. With apologies to all the prose writers out there. I do write prose as well and have utmost respect for it. So, prose in a small space. It's supposed to be prose if it runs on and on, isn't it? All those words, too many to fall into rank and file, stumbling bare-ass drunk onto the field, reporting for duty. Yes, sir, spilling out as shamelessly as the glut from a mega-billion-dollar chemical facility. Just the amount of glittering effluvium it takes to transport a little girl across a room, beige carpet thick under her Oxfords, curtains blousy with spring. Is that the scent of daffodils drifting in? Daffodils don't smell, but prose doesn't care. Prose likes to hear itself talk. Prose is development and denouement, anticipation hovering near the canopies, lust rampant in the antipasto. For example, a silver fork fingered sadly as the heroine crumples a linen napkin in her lap to keep from crying out at the sight of Lord Campion's regal brow inclined tenderly toward the wealthy young widow. Prose applauds such syntactical dalliances. Then is it poetry if it's confined? Trembling along its axis, a flagpole come alive in high wind, flapping its radiant sleeve for attention. Over here, it's me, while the white spaces, air, field, early morning silence before the school bell, shape themselves around that one bright seizure. And if that's so, what do we have here? A dream or 3 paragraphs? We have white space too. Is this music? As for all the words left out, banging at the gates, we could let them in, but where would we go with our orders, our stuttering pride? So this is really the first full-fledged, full-length kind of reading that I've been permitted to give out of this book. I've been doing a couple of samplings, which is a totally different thing. And I thought to give you a sense of the book, I was going to proceed more or less chronologically, though knowing me, I'll probably switch it up somewhere in between. I wanted to give you a sense of each of its sections. And in this, that poem is actually not, it's a frontispiece, as I think it really should, it deserves to be a frontispiece. In the first section called Time's Arrow, I'd like to start with that kind of arrow of time that we have grown somewhat unused to, I guess, and that is the idea of a bell, not a school bell as in the first poem, but the actual bell that tolls the hours. Now, the bell ringer here at the University of Virginia, who used to toll the hours during the time of the early days of this university, was a mixed race man by the name of Henry Martin. And he would climb into that rotunda and toll out the hours. Bell ringer. I was given a name. It came out of a book. I don't know which. I've been told the great man could recite every title in order on its shelf. Well, I was born, and that's a good thing, although I arrived on the day of his passing, a day on which our country fell into mourning. This I heard over and over from professors to farmers, even dual-scarred students, sometimes in grand company, remarked upon in third person, a pretty way of saying more than 2 men in a room means the third can be ignored, as I was when they spoke of my birth and Mr. Jefferson's death in one breath, voices dusted with wonderment, faint sunlight quivering on a hidden breeze. I listen in on the lectures whenever I can, holding still until I disappear beyond third person, and what I hear sounds right enough. It eases my mind. I know my appearance frightened some of the boys. The high cheeks and freckles and not quite Negro eyes flaring gray as storm-washed skies back home. It shames them to be reminded. So much for book learning. I nod as if to say, Uncle Henry, at your service, then continue on my way through darkness to start the day. This is my place. Stone rookery perched above the citadels of knowledge, alone with the bats and my bell, keeping time. Up here, molten glory brims until my head's rinsed clear. I am no longer a dreadful coincidence, nor debt crossed off in a dead man's ledger. I am not summoned, dismissed. I am the clock's keeper. I ring in their ears. And every hour down in that shining, blistered republic, someone will pause to whisper, Henry. And for a moment, my name flies free. Mm. Terrence Hayes's wonderful new form, The Golden Shovel, is the basis of this poem, which takes as the line that it uses a line from Gwendolyn Brooks, From the Sidelines. It seems I have always sat here watching men like you, who turn heads, whose gaze is either a kiss or a slap or the whiplash of pure disregard. Why fret? All you're doing is walking. You're this year's it, the one righteous integer of cool, cruising down a great-lipped channel of hushed adoration. Women turned girls again, brightening in spite of themselves. That brave, wilting smile, you don't see it, do you? How she tells herself to move on, blinks until she can. I hope that all of us will be able to join together again in person soon. I know that the strain that it puts on all of us, but also particularly on those who really live for and warm to family gatherings. It's very hard. In my family, whenever we had a family reunion, which means the greater family, we usually would convene around the barbecue grill. That's where you go. And most of my family, my greater family, is in upstate Ohio, in northern Ohio. Though, because they came up with the Great Migration, there is a tendency to have I don't know what you would call it, but a linguistic pull to the South. Let's put it that way. Family reunion. 30 seconds into the barbecue, my Cleveland cousins have everyone speaking Southern, broadened vowels and dropped consonants, whoops and caws. It's more osmosis than magic, a sliding thrall back to a time when working the tire factories meant entire neighborhoods coming up from Georgia or Tennessee, accents helplessly intact, while their children, inflections flattened to match the field they thought they were playing on, knew without asking when it was safe to roll out a draw, just as it's understood potluck means resurrecting the food we've abandoned along the way for the sake of sleeker thighs. I look over the yard to the porch with its battalion of aunts, the wavering ranks of uncles at the grill. Everywhere else, hordes of progeny are swirling and my cousins yakking on as if they were waist deep in quicksand, but like the books recommend, aren't moving until someone hauls them free. Who are all these children? Who had them and with whom? Through the general coffee tones, the shamed genetics cut a creamy swath. Cherokee's burnt umber transposed onto generous lips. A glance flares gray above the crushed nose we label anonymous African. It's all here, the beautiful geometry of Mendel's peas and their grim logic. And though we remain clearly divided on the merits of okra, there's still time to demolish the cheese grits and tear into slow-cooked ribs so tender we agree they're worth the extra pound or two our menfolk swear will always bring them home. Pity the poor soul who lives a life without butter, those pinched knees and tennis shoulders and hatchety smiles. Let's see, where do we go from here? I think I'm going to move into the next section. which is called After Egypt. It got its initial inspiration from an invitation by the University of Venice. A professor by the name of Shalbasi had conceived in honor of the 500th anniversary of the first mention of the word ghetto, which occurred in the Venetian ghetto in the 16th century. A tribute asking writers and artists to reimagine the concept of ghetto. That is, to not only write about or to create something which talked about that original ghetto, but also the way in which the word has been applied and lived and experienced ever since. And so I it's such an amazing journey to realize, first of all, that the original word ghetto comes from a Venetian dialect word get, which possibly has its origins in the word for slag, or the stuff that was dumped out of a foundry. That was the land, that was the particular peninsula that the Jewish ghetto in Venice was founded upon, because of course, those who were not wanted were shunted aside on the least profitable or the least fertile land. And I'm going to read a poem that I believe I've never, ever read it before. It is a poem written from the point of view of Leona de Modena, who was one of the great minds of 16th century Venice, Jewish, and he is going off for his morning constitutional. Abad, the constitutional. A day like this, I should count among the miracles of living. Breath, a heart that beats, that aches and sings. Even the ecstasy of thirst or sweat peppering my brow, fanned by the mercurial breezes crisscrossing this reserve, our allotment on earth. Why then am I unhappy when all around me the human pageant whirs? This much I can do for my lost, my sweet and damaged tribe. Each morning I pace the tattered verge of their most serene republic, patrol each canal's fogged sibilance, chanting a day unlike all others. And then I count it, and the next, God willing, and each day thereafter as a path free of echoes, a promise with no parameters, my foot soles polishing the scarred stones. This poem is spoken by the children in one of the concentration camps, Theresienstadt, which was the concentration camp where most of the composers and the musicians were sent. In spite of these horrors, the adults did try to keep up school, and they had to, of course, teach these children in hiding. Orders of the day. After the bellowed call to rise, the cold dribble wash up before making our cots. After chores were dealt out as we crumbled bread into sour cabbage, then fell in line to be totted up, numbers matched to fates. There was a moment. Before the scramble to class, lookouts posted below the attic hutch, no more than a flicker, a bright, brutal remembering, when we became ourselves again, cowlicked and plated, flush with pocketed apples or tucked away sweets. We were not hunched in rain being counted or shivering under rafters, trying to keep pace with our dreams of the outside world. We were merely children, And that brief forgetting, that raging stupor, we tried to hold quiet in our heads as if in a brimming goblet until the day lurched upright, barking its orders, was either the most blissful or shattering instant we would live through on earth. This hard and sullen earth we no longer recognize, but would sooner than later commit our souls to when at last our bodies crumbled into their final resting place. Part of the 1619 project asked if I could compose a poem dealing with one of the key events or tragedies, one should say, in the modern era concerning race. And as much as I did not want to revisit this moment, because who wants to revisit pain and tragedy, I could hear in a certain way the voices of the 4 young schoolgirls from the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, whose lives were cut short by the bombs. And this is their poem, Youth Sunday, 16th Street Baptist Church, Birmingham, Alabama. This morning's already good. Summer's cooling, Addie chattering like a magpie, but today we are leading the congregation. Ain't that a fine thing? All white, like angels, they'll be sighing when we appear at the pulpit and proclaim, open your hymnals. Addie, what's the page number again? Never mind, it'll be posted. I think, I hope. Hold still, Carol, or else this sash will never sit right. There, now you do mine. Almost 11. I'm ready. My, don't we look, what's that word the Reverend used in last Sunday's sermon? Oh, I got it. Ethereal. You know, my daughter, when she was very, very young, when she was 3 or 4, used to march around the house singing that nobody loved her but the spring cricket. And she had a little tune to it, and she just would do it. And we would say, who is the spring cricket and why don't you think that we love you? But of course, that was the point. And she used this little weapon for a while. And so I began to think about the spring cricket and decided that I would write a few poems from that cricket's point of view. She's granted me permission to read these poems. She's now a professor herself and has her own daughter who is 7. And she says, okay, I know what you meant, how they use these moments to make sure that your love is still there. So a few poems from the spring, a couple of poems, I think, just from the spring cricket's point of view in this next section. The spring cricket considers the question of negritude. I was playing my tunes all by myself. I didn't know anybody else who could play along. Sure, the tunes were sad, but sweet too, and wouldn't come until the day gave out. You know that way the sky has of dangling her last bright wisps? That's when the ache would bloom inside until I couldn't wait. I knelt down to scrape myself clean and didn't care who heard. Then came the shouts and whistles, the roundup into jars, a clamber of legs. Now there were others, tumbled, clouded. I didn't know their names. We were a musical lantern. Children slept to our rasping sighs. And if now and then one of us shook free and sang as he climbed to the brim, he would always fall again, which made them laugh and clap their hands. At least then we knew what pleased them and where the brink was. The spring cricket repudiates his parable of negritude. Hell, we just climbed, reached the lip and fell back, slipped and started up again, climbed to be climbing, sang to be singing. It's just what we do. No one bothered to analyze our blues until everybody involved was strung out or dead. To solve everything that was happening while it was happening would have taken some serious opium. Seriously, all wisdom is afterthought, a sort of helpless relief. So don't go thinking none of this grief belongs to you, even if you don't know how it feels to fall. You can get my drift. And I, who live it daily, have heard that perfect word enough to know just when to use it, as in, oh hell, hell no, no, this is hell. How you hanging in there? All right. I'm going to move on to the next section, which is called A Standing Witness, and has as an epigraph something from that great man, James Baldwin, a quote, "People are trapped in history and history is trapped in them." This section was the result of a collaboration with a wonderful composer, Richard Daniel Poor, for a song cycle. And the song cycle, which is hopefully going to premiere after many postponements. It was supposed to be at Tanglewood last year and this summer, and now will pretty much premiere at the Kennedy Center in November. This song cycle basically covers the last 50, 60 years of American and American history, spoken from the point of view pretty much of a witness who turns out to be the Statue of Liberty. I'll read to you two of these. One of the challenges of working with those kind of strictures was to know that with a song cycle, there's a certain amount of time that you have, that songs like sonnets, and many of these are close to sonnets or circle that sonnet realm. That's just about the right amount of time for a song. Also to know that the singer, and this is a mezzo soprano, Susan Graham is going to be singing the premiere, that to know that tessitura, to know what that sound is like. And we had some wonderful moments where he would come back to me and say, this word really just is difficult to sing, but I'll do it if you want to, which would then send me thinking, well, is there an even better word or not? And conversely, sometimes I would listen to some of the, just a melodic phrase and say, I actually thought this should go faster. And so we worked back and forth that way. I'll read to you the first two of these. The first one is a prologue. All of them take their titles from, in the book, take their titles from excerpts from Emma Lazarus' poem, which is at the Statue of Liberty. Beside the golden door. Surely there must be something beautiful to smile upon. The umbered blue edge of sky as it fades into evening, the brusque green heave of the sea. When I look up, surely there will be a cloud or a lone star dangling. Truth is, the truth has gone walking, left her perch for the doves and ravens to ravage, hightailed it to the hills, to the quiet beyond rivers and trees. No matter what ragged carnival may be thronging the streets, what bleak homestead or plantation of sorrows howling its dominion, truth would say these are arrogant times. Believers slaughter their doubters, while the greedy oil their lips with excuses, and the righteous turn merciless, the merciful mad. 1968 was a year of multiple assassinations, a time when once again we thought this was the end. You're tired, you're poor. Who comforts you now that the wheel has broken? No more princes for the poor, loss whittling you thin. Grief is the constant now, hope the last word spoken. In a dance of two elegies, which circles the drain? A token year with its daisies and carbines is where we begin. Who comforts you now? That the wheel has broken is Mechanics 101. To keep dreaming when the joke's on you? Well, crazier legends have been written. Grief is the constant now. Hope the last word spoken on a motel balcony, shouted in a hotel kitchen. No kin can make this journey for you. The roots locked in. Who comforts you now that the wheel has broken the bodies of its makers? Beyond the smoke and ashes, what you hear rising is nothing but the wind. Who comforts you? Now that the wheel has broken, grief is the constant. Hope, the last word spoken. So that was 1968. The 90s were a time of great, I don't know, consumerism, I guess you could say. Everything was busting out all over. And so for the 90s, this testimony, worldwide welcome. Hubba Bubba bubble tape, chicken pita wrap to go, pop rocks, push pops, dipping dots, Oreos, beanie babies by the handful, wool or pleather, felt or straw, mood rings for internal weather, Wonder Bra. Page my Palm Pilot when you're done. I'll cut through the traffic mess and pull up curbside in my Saturn. Thank you, GPS. Who wouldn't want to be a millionaire or a real life princess or king of the world? Map your jeans and pierce your navel, Spice Girl. Fire up the circuits in your PlayStation. If you're Game Boy, I'll tickle your Elmo. How's your Tamagotchi been hanging? Oh, Mario. Magic's vanished from the court. Great Gretzky has exited the ice. Buffy or Baywatch, Cosmo or Xena, reality bites. Give me a logo to go with my windows, eBay for old, Amazon for new, a Hubble, a Canon, an Apple a day, and we all shout, Yahoo. Oh, it was amazing to look at, in that case, I was just looking through to see what happened in the 90s. It's amazing how many things started in the 90s, actually, that we think of as being more contemporary. Let me move on. So those were three from the standing witness section. And even though that last one is on the page, looks a lot longer than many of the other pieces in that section, it's been scored to go very quickly. It just kind of rattles off. I read it a little more slowly than I think Susan is going to be singing it. This next section is called 8 Angry Oats. And I discovered that one of the things that was happening when I was putting together this book, and it had been a long time in coming. I had been working on it and holding back for many reasons, some of which become clear when you read the book. I realized that I was very angry. I was angry at the way the world was going, things that could have been averted that were not being averted. And so one day I just thought, you know, I'm really tired of all these odes. I'm going to write some angry ones. And so let me read to you a poem which is not labeled ode, though it, in a certain way it is. It takes place in my hometown, Charlottesville, which of course has become a household word. And it's called Pedestrian Crossing, Charlottesville. A gaggle of girls giggle over the bricks leading off Court Square. We break dutifully and wait. But there's at least 20 of these knob-kneed creatures, blonde and curly, still at an age that thinks impudence is cute. Look how they dart and dither, changing flanks as they lurch along. Golden gobbets of infuriating foolishness or pure joy, depending on one's disposition. At the moment, mine's sour. This is taking far too long. Don't they have minders? Just behind my shoulder in the city park, the Southern General still stands, stonewalling us all. When I was their age, I judged Goldilocks nothing more than a pint-sized criminal who flounced into others' lives, then assumed their clemency. Unfair, I know, my aggression, to lump them into a gaggle, silly geese, when all they're guilty of is being young. So far. I am a night person, a very, very devout night person. I work from midnight to 6 usually. And I know that's very strange, but it suits me, it suits my body. And so what can I say? But this poem started in the middle of the night. I had just come home from a dance class. This was before the pandemic. My husband and I do ballroom dancing. What comes with ballroom dancing is, especially at my age, are a lot of banged up joints. And so this one is an ode to my right knee. It was also a wild card. A wild card in my classrooms is it's a personalized writing assignment that leads you very, very far away from your comfort level. And my students had decided that I needed one. And so in this wild card, every line has its own assonance or consonants. In other words, every word begins with the same letter of the alphabet. I was allowed to not to have to do it alphabetically, thank goodness. Ode to my right knee. O obstreperous one, ornery outside of ordinary protocols, paramilitary proby par excellence. Every evidence you yield yells. No noise, too tough to tackle, tears springing such sudden salt when walking wrenches. Haranguer, hag, hanger on, how much more maddening, insidious imperfection. Membranes matter-of-factly corroding, crazed cartilage calmly chipping away as another arduous ambulation begins, bone bruising bone. Leathery Lothario, lone laboring gladiator, grappling, groveling for favor. Fair weather forecaster, fickle friend, jive jiggy joint. Kindly keep kicking. It's still kicking. And I am going to end with this poem, I think. I always have to decide which one is on here. Last words. I don't want to die in a poem. The words burning in eulogy, the sun howling, why? The moon sighing, why not? I don't want to die in bed, which is a poem gone wrong, a world turned in on itself, a floating navel of dreams. I won't meet death in a field like a dot punctuating a page. It's too vast, yet too tiny. Everyone will say it's a bit cinematic. I don't want to pass away in your arms, those gentle parentheses, nor expire outside of their swoon, self-propelled, determined, shouting. Let the end come as the best parts of living have come, unsought and undeserved, inconvenient. Now that's a good death. What nonsense, you say. That's not even worth writing down. Thank you all. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. James, might we unmute everyone and just for a moment to let Rita hear and feel everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Fabulous, fabulous.
Thank you.
So wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. And I hope you have questions. I'll try to answer them. Now, am I supposed to monitor the questions? I'm not. Let me just ask this question because I can go into the chat and look. Or is Partridge, are you going to?
I haven't seen any in the chat. Oh, plenty of responses.
Okay.
And accolades.
All right. Great.
But no questions as of yet. But if none are forthcoming, I have a few. If you you'll indulge me, and as we take a moment to.
Yes, I see there is one from Jonathan and Julie. What sort of research did you do for the 1990s poem to make sure you didn't have any anachronisms? And it was really, really fun to do. I, you know, of course, the first thing I did was what all of us do, which is to kind of Google the 1990s, and you'd be amazed at the wealth of stuff you get from there. And then I went into each individual thing that struck my fancy. And, you know, for this poem, basically what I wanted to try to do is to play around with, to have a bunch of wordplay, play around with puns and innuendo. And so though I wanted to try to get a kind of a spread between science and just plain consumerism and joy, I also was looking for things that just lent themselves to puns. And then I just made absolutely sure that they happened in the 90s. I just kind of researched it. It took a long time, but it's fun. That's the kind of research where you can kid yourself that you're really doing something, that you're really writing when you're cruising the internet. Yeah. So thank you.
We have another here. Could you say more about about the wild card in your classroom?
The wild card in my classroom, I usually preface this by saying that though I don't like to give writing prompts, as particularly at the graduate level, because I feel like life, you know, people don't give you writing prompts once you get out of school. But I also say that you know, the kind of things that prompt you to write a poem are unexpected. And so the wild card is something that happens usually about halfway through the semester, maybe a little later, after I've gotten to know the students a little bit, and to both through their poems and through their comments, what kind of poems they like to write, whether they're writing short lyrics or whether they're writing poems based in history or longer narratives or whatever. And then I think, okay, let me devise a writing prompt just for this, let's say student A, that's going to make them angry because they're saying, this is not what I do. And, you know, my response to that is that, hey, life is not what we do, you know, we don't plan it this way. And there's also no prescribed time that I deliver these. Some of these get delivered, halfway through the semester, some 2 weeks before the end. Some people get, sometimes I give them 5 days to write, sometimes 3 weeks, and they're usually very weird. And that's really important. It's important that they are so outrageously strange that at some point, the student A will say, oh, this is impossible. I'm just going to go out there. No one sees the results except me, unless they decide that they want to share it with someone. But so that there is, I hope, a feeling that no one else is going to see this. I will protect them, and they can do and be as wild as they want. The goal of that is really to stretch a student, to have them feel that they can write something that they feel is incomplete and messy because it's not what they're comfortable with, and that can open up to other poems. Usually what happens is that some of those wild cards are the best things that they've written because they've let that guard down. So I have fun thinking them up, and some of them involve multiple things, like going outside and looking for the first thing that's orange. Some of them, involve things like that. Some of them are different. It's really fun to do. Maybe I have more fun than they do. I don't know.
Well, here's one from Micah, and I'm curious about this myself. I might just have to piggyback a little bit on it, but do you just write from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. or do you also edit during those late hours too? And that kind of feeds into a curiosity I have about how COVID may or may not have affected your creative process. And
anything goes in that period, and I will edit and write other times as well. It's just that I realized that those were the hours in which I'm really the most in tune with my body and I have the most energy. So I will tend to get, I don't know, I won't say better results, but I will write more and more intensely, I guess you could say, during that time. So though I usually find that I'm writing during those hours, I tend to work in fragments. I don't work on one poem or just a couple of poems and then continually revise them. I have lots of fragments of many different poems. I could be working on 5 or 6 poems at once. That sounds weird, but it's the way I actually lead my life. I mean,
way to be productive.
Yeah, it's hi, Joyce.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was unmuted.
Oh no, that's fine. This is a conversation as well. Well, it's a way to be productive, but also it can be nerve-wracking because I can exist in fragments for a long time and have nothing. It seems like I have nothing because there's a scrap of a stanza here and there's a few lines there, and they're all I put them in color-coded pocket folders, mainly because I work by hand. I love to work by hand if I can, and keep it as close as possible to something I can touch with my hands. But that way I don't have to put them into categories. And, in other words, impose that outside organization to it. I can say, I feel like I want to go to the yellow folder today. I feel like I'm in that mood today, and then work until I can't go any further on a particular fragment. So the fragments eventually, hopefully, a few of them will begin to accrue. What usually happens is a blissful period where 2-3 poems finish at the same time. But then there's also those vast periods where they're all just hanging out there defying me. And so that means that, to get back to the question that you had, that sometimes during that period of time, I'm also revising, if one can call it that. I'm also taking this, a piece that I've been working on earlier and trying to move forward with it or backwards with it or adding to it or tweaking it. Yeah. I keep a notebook. I'm very old school. You know, I have physical notebooks that I keep, but I also record on my phone. And I just find that the best thing you can do in terms of a writer, in terms of trying to be present completely when you're writing, is to try to figure out if there's what your best hours are, and move heaven and earth to be able to write during those times. If you can't, then you know, get the second best time, or you do whatever you have to do. But it's really wonderful to be able to sync your body with your spirit.
Thank you. Do we have any, I don't see any other questions in chat. Do we have any other questions directly from the audience at this
Here's
point?
can you talk about
Are there still some more? Maybe I missed. Oh, look.
yeah, they're coming in now.
We'll scroll down a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Here's one. Recommend a book or two you have read recently, and again, I would add to that. I'm curious to know what new masters, as opposed to Auden's old masters, that you've come across lately that have captured our human position in this moment, especially while younger poets. What would you have any recommendations?
There are so many amazing younger poets who are coming out that I can barely keep track of them. I am absolutely astonished and by the inventiveness and their fearlessness and their rigor, which I think are all elements that have to come together with poems. And you know, I'm loath to kind of say, oh, read this person or that person, because then I know as soon as I get off here, I'm going to say, oh, but what about so and so? I forgot them. You know, and so all I can say is I could recommend you to the fact that I've been on the jury of the Ennisfield Wolf Awards for many, many years, and Skip Gates is the head of it. It's a great group of jurors. Joyce Carol Oates, Simon Schama, and Steven Pinker, and these awards are given out in various disciplines of the lifetime achievement, nonfiction and fiction, and now most recently poetry for the past 5 or so years. What's wonderful is the respect that each of the juries offers to the others in terms of their genres. I have been let's see, how can I explain this? The Ennisfield Wolf Awards are given for books that celebrate diversity in all of its forms. And so that has a very broad umbrella. Recent winners in the poetry section, which is not solely my decision, but also it's a joint decision, have been Ilya Kaminsky's Deaf Republic, which I think is phenomenal. Jericho Brown's The Tradition, and Tayimba Jess's Olio, which we in fact gave to him before he got the Pulitzer and all. Same with Jericho, and all I can say is yes, 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 yes. Then Marilyn Chin. So there was an older poet, but still equally wonderful. I have been, and there are more. I mean, I don't want to touch this except to say that I've been having a great time. Adrian Sue's Peach State and Rosina Mort's wonderful book. And I have a pile of books, you know, right now. And I tend to keep my books. I put books to be read in every room. And so I just, like, I guess I do other things in fragments. If I walk into a room, that's the book I pick up. And so I have little depositories throughout the house of books that I'm just having a ball reading. But there have been Shane McCrae. I'm just thinking through my head of poets who are just so doing such fantastic work. And every day I open up my Facebook and discover somebody else. So send me your suggestions, please.
To be continued.
Yes.
Thank you. I think we have a couple more. If you're
Sure, I'm game.
you feel them, sure. We have Jennifer writes, so happy to hear these poems. Thank you. I was interested in how the spring cricket poems started with this interesting situation with your daughter and then expanded into so much more. Can you talk about how poems or even books start and when, and then move forward, and how that evolution happens and how goals for the work develop as you write?
This is, I don't know still, after all these years, I don't know how books develop. I mean, unless it's an absolute themed book like Sonata Melodica, in which case there's this story already, and I give myself to that story. In terms of how a book of poems finally then gels, it still remains a mystery to me, and I'm kind of grateful to that fact. By that I mean that even with, let's take the spring cricket poems, and there are a few of them, that little chant that my daughter gave could have just let it pass, because children do that. But it just started my curiosity. Well, what would a spring cricket, if the spring cricket loves her and has singled her out, what do they share that would make them feel that they could commiserate with each other? And then I remember, it's been a while from the first one to the last one, which is very recent, of these poems. I remember, of course, going in and looking up everything about crickets. I know so much about crickets now, practically none of which makes it into the poems, but it did allow me to begin to feel like a cricket, if that makes any sense. And where they went, how they developed, is something that I feel like more that I want to be open to the possibilities. They can go anywhere they want to. In a similar way, oddly enough, when it gets to the point where a book begins to accrue, I could say it begins to consolidate. I feel that it's there at the edges. And what I do is I actually take the poems that I have, that I've written, that I feel are, need to be seen or have been published or whatever. And I print them out and I spread them on the floor and I walk amongst them. And I just, we spend time together. we kind of, so I actually get this physical thing where I think, okay, this is a neighborhood of poems and this is a group of poems, and I let them talk to each other that way. And something happens. And I think the mystery, I'm not touching that mystery, because if you poke too much in a mystery, it can go away. So it's nothing to be afraid of, is what I'm saying. For those students who are, just trying to put together their first books or working on their poems, I think that the mystery is the part that I most cherish. Yeah.
Thank you. And it seems like our audience is starting to live the questions. Let's see. We have
Okay.
a couple more, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely.
Here's one that sounds pretty big. Do you think that the pandemic has changed how people see poetry?
That's a great question too. I think it has. I think that as we were forced inside, and as we were forced into our homes and to distance, we began to, many of us, I guess, we realized how much we yearned for human contact. The kind of human contact we could have was through Zoom, which has its problems. It also has its advantages, but then also the sheer fact of the word, the fact of the written word or the read word became important. And for as much as I really sometimes get impatient with social media, I did notice that there were many more poems that were being posted on social media, and people who were reading them and were commenting upon them. And so it was a way of touching without touching, which is, what any good art, any art does, it touches us without having to actually physically, put a hand on our shoulder, whatever. So it has changed. People, I feel like we are beginning to listen more. Also, we've read more. I know even for me, I've read more during the pandemic, of course, than I did, before that. And when I say read, I mean really live with a book, not have it be disturbed by other noise outside, or having to, read it on the road or anything like that, but just to be there with the book until I disappeared. And that is, in a certain way, I'd wager to say, is what got a lot of us into our love of books in the first place. That was the experience when we were younger of disappearing inside of a book. So I do think it has changed the way that we read and that we look at poetry in particular, which is the deepest of readings. Will this stick? I don't know. I hope so. I hope we can carry that out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And one final one, I guess, unless any other hands get raised. What do you think about the spoken word and written word poetry communities regarding their similarities and differences, and at times what feels like a cultural clash, etc.? I've heard some say that Amanda Gorman's poem was a good performance poem, but not read well on the page. Not sure I'm framing this question well, but any comments will be helpful.
Okay, well, I think that this is one of those arguments, I guess you could call, or debates that is, to me, it's almost like a non-debate in the sense that there is room enough at the table for everybody. And certainly a spoken word or performance poetry says in its very definition that these are supposed to be spoken, that there's an element of performance. And so that means that it's also has a great debts and I think investments in the dramatic community, in an idea of a play. Is a play, when we read a play, in a book, or in a textbook, or we study it, is that the entire play? Of course not. When we see it, in a theater, this is the entire experience, and it can be good or bad depending on the actors and the director and all that. We won't go into all that. So, but we're able to do that with plays, and yet when we hit something like spoken word or page poetry, stage poetry, all that kind of stuff, we formed camps where, okay, I'm for the page, and I'm for the as if they can't exist at the same time. I would say that a poem that is meant to be spoken and to be performed takes upon itself a sense of who the audience is and how they will hear it. And that if you're, for instance, with Amanda Gorman's poem, she was going to be delivering a poem in front of an enormous audience with a microphone at a time when most people are not going to be kind of zeroing in on a poem. It would have been a great disservice to all poetry if she had said, okay, I'm going to write the poem which I wish they could see it on the page. That's not where it's supposed to be. So to me, to say, oh, that poem is just and I put quotation marks around that, just a performance poem, it's disingenuous. It is what it is. And for what it is, it did an amazing job. Now, the part of the reason why I think some of this disgruntlement happens is that the feeling that, well, that takes away from, people who are writing poems on the page. And I beg to differ. I find that there's a whole generation of younger people who are now interested in poetry. And some of them will, yes, they will want to perform poetry. And some of them will actually, will pick up a book and will actually start reading poems. And so I just say the more the merrier. Yeah.
Fantastic. Guess we'll wrap things up. It's a great sentiment to end on. Thank you for sharing your insights with us, and what a rare and wonderful, absolutely riveting gift. An honor to hear you read from your new collection. Thank you. I invite Carol. I think, Carol, did you want to have any last words at this point, or? I think you're muted.
Yeah. I guess.
With that,
Wait.
All right.
Dee Dee?
there you are.
There you
Okay, I was saying I am at a loss for words because it has been a fantastic evening, Rita. Thank you so much. I mean, it's been gone deep to the heart, and I really appreciate it so much. I really don't know what to say, Partridge.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
I thank all of you. It's such a warm community. I can feel it even through Zoom. And so I applaud all of you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Yes, thanks everybody for being here.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.